Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the El Guadualito wash processed Colombia from Say Coffee. And there's the box right there. And Say, based out of Brooklyn, New York. And they're a coffee roaster that's appeared on this channel quite a bit this year, having recently reviewed the Pepe Hun collaboration coffees. And this coffee was actually released at the same time as those, but I feel like it might have been overlooked by some because of how exciting those coffees were. But I was actually equally excited about this one, as this is an ají coffee, and my favorite Colombian coffee last year, the Jose Salazar from Passenger, was also an ají coffee, so I was definitely excited about this one as well, and I'm looking forward to discussing it, as this right here is day 43. And recipe we went with for this one was Say's recipe, actually, at a 17:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 100 degrees Celsius, 212 degrees Fahrenheit. And I actually like this one best through the V60, which typically indicates a more medium fine grind, but we pushed this one quite a bit, so went even more fine on that grind as well. Now, roast profile for this one is very much on par with a lot of the experiences we've had from Say in general, as there's nothing too much to differentiate this roast profile from the number of ones that we've had from them in the past. So once again, I would say that this is a very light coffee by most standards and metrics. With all that out of the way, let's go and start discussing this coffee. Day 14, first impression, and we did opt for the V60, and there was already a notable bit of positives as it had an above average sweetness for this coffee with some soft grainy florals and a lingering fruit depth to it as well. Stone fruits were subtle but radiating potential, as the cup didn't feel quite ready yet, but I was still curious to see what more we would get from this one. Day 17 opted for the Chemex and more of the same, as it's not quite as sweet as that first impression, but it is offering more of the potential yet again, as it's yielding a soft floral grainy quality and some subtle lingering stone fruit components to it as well. Apricot is felt in a very subtle sense, as it seems to open up much more as it does cool down, with a slight bit of improvement on this second try. Day 20 opted for the April Brewer, and it's the first time the cup is starting to feel like it's opened a little bit more with better sweetness and definition, especially to the listed grape component, as it's the most prominent it has been up to this point. Still a little bit of that Loring-like papery, grainy quality to it with an unripened stone fruit, but it is much more pronounced in the finish on the cool down itself. Day 23 opted for the V60 with the Say recipe, finer grind and higher temps, and this has really seemed to help the coffee, as it's the best it's been to this point by a distance. A strong bit of brightness and fruit vibrancy with plenty of the listed grape-like aspects to it. There's a sugar cookie-like sweetness as well, with some crisp peachiness to the cup, so much better on this day, definitely vastly improved. Day 26 opted for the Chemex with the same adjustments, and it's very nice again, as there's much better definition to the listed grape aspect, and as well as some sugary sweetness and fruit vibrancy yet again. So this one was another very nice day, once again getting some very straightforward profiles within this one. Day 29, a little bit of inconsistency as we went back to our day 23 recipe, and it wasn't quite as intense as some of the previous experiences. And honestly, what it was is that I did not turn the notch, I would say, far enough in terms of the fineness, and I feel like that really mattered a lot with this coffee, as it was ever so slightly sensitive. It had a little bit more of a delicate focus on the grape-like aspects, but it did open up a little bit on the cool down with slightly more florality. But for the most part, this one was relatively tame compared to the previous experiences we'd had. Day 32 through the Chemex with a much finer grind, and once again, it really seems to help quite a bit, as there's much more intensity to the coffee. It feels like there's a focus on the sugary sweet aspects with a softer fruit to complement it, mostly a sugary cookie with a florality yet again. And then day 36 found that we have through the V60 with those higher extraction adjustments again, and it is really nice off brew, as it's offering a very bright citric sense to it, and what I describe as an almost Welch's grape juice like profile before cooling down into much more of that apricot like feel. Definitely a much better day this time around. Alright, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have a lot of level 4s, so let's go through those, and we'll start with the cleanliness level 4. So this one was a very clean coffee, and if there's a huge positive I have to say about this coffee, is that there was really nice definition to, I would say, certain aspects of it, most specifically that sort of grape juice like components to it. So level 4 felt really nice for it. I would say slightly cleaner side of that as well. Finish, level 4. And I do have to say that the finish on this one being a little bit more on that sweeter side of things and being kind of varied, especially most certainly focused on that stone fruit-like aspect, was one of the more enjoyable parts of this coffee, which had a lot of really enjoyable aspects to it. So that is also on the higher side of the level 4. A lot of these level 4s, I remember making this tasting wheel and saying they're all going to be on the slightly higher side of the level 4. Same thing with the sweetness level 4. I think it's worth keeping in context that this coffee was brewed alongside of the Finca San Pedro and Finca Surya coffees, which were immensely sweet coffees. So this one, once again, opting on the sweeter side of things, higher side of the level 4, but I think for the most part, the reason it didn't reach the same levels as those is mostly because of what those coffees are in general. Acidity, level 4. This one was surprisingly bright, and once again, it's kind of interesting that a lot of the coffees we've had from Say have still continued to offer a lot of that brightness. I don't think I've had too many ahi coffees. I don't think a lot of people have in general, so it's hard to tell whether or not this is a component of the varietals or if it's because of the profile that Say continues to use with their coffees. But nonetheless, I would say that this one had a fair bit of brightness to it at that level 4 mark. Florality, level 4. And I did mention that floral-like aspect to it. It's a little bit more of like a honeysuckle-like component to it, and usually when I get some sweeter floral components, that's usually the first direction I go towards. And I could definitely see a fair bit of it within this one, as it was prominent and abundant a lot of the time within this coffee. I could say there's also a sweeter vanilla-like component, which is in line with that sugar cookie-like descriptor I had for this one. So that definitely felt justified there at that level 4. Berry fruit, level 4, and that's that grape juice-like aspect, and it was kind of interesting to me just how much of a definition there was to the coffee in that specific sense. So I would say that it was one of the more, I would say, unique and enjoyable parts of this coffee as well, mostly because it's just something that I haven't experienced too frequently from a lot of other coffees in general. Citrus fruit, level 4. If there's one slight knock I guess I have to say about this coffee, is that the citrus was maybe a little less defined. It was just a little bit more of a generic citrus, but I was perfectly fine with that, mostly because it didn't necessarily mean that it was an overly, like, we'll say, tart sort of citric component to it, or even then maybe an unripened citric component, just a little bit more of a generic citric quality to it. But I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that there was plenty of brightness within it. Stone fruit, level 4. And while I feel like that might be ever so slightly generous when compared alongside of the berry-like attributes to it, I would say that I was experiencing enough of a peachiness, enough of an apricot-like component throughout the entirety of this coffee that even though it was maybe at times a little bit more subtle and not quite as consistent as that berry fruit aspect, justified at that level 4 nonetheless. Last thing worth discussing on this tasting wheel is the body at a level 2, as it didn't necessarily have the most amount of body, which once again is kind of interesting, mostly because I made this coffee alongside of those Mejorado coffees. But outside of that, as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it's a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I'm really enjoying it once again here on this day 43 mark. And for a coffee that was basically tasked with going alongside of those Mejorado coffees, it did a phenomenal job of standing out on its own and making it a coffee that I was enjoying. Looking forward to trying every single time I brewed it. So I feel like they did a very nice job with this one. Now, I think the coffee I have to compare it to the most is the Jose Caro, which is the other washed Colombia that we've reviewed from Say recently. And I think I had a slight bit of a preference towards that one, mostly because that one was even more unique than this one. That one had a slightly, we'll say, a more defined profile to it, swinging a little bit more in a direction, a sweeter direction that I was very much enjoying for that coffee. Nonetheless, this one's pretty close. I actually really enjoyed this Colombian coffee too. And it's interesting to me because normally I don't have too many Colombian coffees from Say throughout the year that I feel like were really big standouts. But now as of this moment, I've had two that I thought were just really exceptional, especially relative to a lot of the Colombian coffees I've had from them in years past. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, I feel like the first place I want to start is if you really like Welch's grape juice, and this is the first direction I want to point you towards. But outside of that, it just offers really nice fruit depth to it, as all three of the fruit components score at that level 4 mark, just indicating how much wonderful fruit depth there is to this coffee. In addition to that, wonderful clarity and immense sweetness as well, especially for what this coffee is, while still offering brightness. So I feel like as far as a modern coffee profile goes, this one offers an abundance of all of those things with some great depth to it as well. So that's the best direction I can point you towards for this one, and the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the El Guadualito wash processed Colombia from Say Coffee. Thank you for watching.